Century Ply is the leader in wood furnishing solutions. Ever since the beginning, we have delivered products that are used extensively in both commercial and domestic settings and have set a standard in today's way of life. We pride ourselves on being pioneers in production of plywood in India. Using state-of-the-art technology, we try and ensure that our customers receive products of the highest quality. Plywood is a product made from natural products, hence, unsurprisingly, it is prone to variances. These variances may be caused by factors like moisture and exposure to heat, or may arise from manufacturing errors. Let us welcome Century Ply's production manager, Mr. Ajit Agarwal, to help us understand these issues better.
Thank you. Let's start by listing down some common defects we see in plywood panels. These defects are thickness variation, overlapping, warping, borer problem, termite problem, delamination, face crack, chipping, core gap, Batten Gap, improper finishing, improper marking. Understanding each of these cases and the customer complaints that arise from them is essential, as it makes the complaint handling process easier for us. Let us take a look at how each complaint is to be inspected and the steps necessary to resolve it.
We'll start at the top of the list. Ajit, what is thickness variation?
Thickness variation refers to a situation where there is a variation in the thickness of plywood, block boards or flush doors, implying that they are either over thick or under thick.
What causes this variation in thickness?
The reason for variations is an uneven thickness of wood veneer and varying densities. This happens because wood is a natural product that does not have an even density across. So while pressing, it may sometimes result into under or over thickness. Century Ply takes adequate measures to maintain uniformity in thickness.
How do we know that a thickness variation complaint is genuine?
There is a method for checking the genuineness of this complaint. You start by measuring the thickness of the panel at the four corners and checking it against the allowable tolerances.
What are these allowable tolerances?
An allowable tolerance is the dimension by which a plywood, block board or flush door is under or over thick, and whether that difference can be allowed or needs to be considered a complaint. If the thickness is less than 6 mm, the tolerance is plus or minus 10%. And if it is more than 6 mm, the tolerance is plus or minus 5%. In case of door, the thickness tolerance is plus or minus 1 mm. We have to check whether the thickness is within range in all the four corners and hence decide whether the defect is genuine and can be considered as a complaint or not.
So, what comes next after checking the thickness?
If the thickness is within the given limit, barring a few pieces, the complaint can be settled. However, if the customer is not satisfied, we have to measure the thickness of all the four corners of 10 to 20 panels and compare the results with that of any competitor's panels. And if the difference is found to be reasonable, the complaint is settled by providing fresh supplies to the customer or by selling the same material for a discounted rate. If the difference is less in only one corner of the panel, then no discounts or settlements are to be given or made. If two edges on the same side have a thickness variation within 1 inch from the edge, then we must resize the material to the next lower size. If the problem persists, the factory is to be informed for further actions.
Seems quite straightforward. Now let us talk about overlapping. Ajit, I believe overlapping occurs, as the name suggests, when the plies of a panel begin to overlap one another. Is that correct?
Indeed, when a veneer manages to get on top of another veneer, thereby resulting in an increase of thickness in the internal construction. It is called overlapping. The effect is visible on the surface of the ply as a raised veneer line. So when you touch it, it feels like a bump or a raised layer, resulting in an uneven surface.
But can you explain what causes the veneers to overlap?
It normally occurs when the core veneer is not aligned properly during manufacturing. Century Ply uses scarf jointer machines to join the veneer edges after sanding, hence reducing the possibilities of overlaps. However, this problem can still creep in sometimes.
And how can we detect overlapping?
In such a situation, we have to check the extent of overlapping. See whether the overlapping is on the face or in the core of the panel, and count the number of overlaps in each side. You can use your hand to feel the surface to see if it is raised or not. Finally, we check if this defect is causing any problems in the application.
Now Ajit, how do we go about it? If the overlap is on the surface or if it is in the core?
This problem only occurs in plywood. So if the overlap is on the surface, mild rubbing with sandpaper will remove it. If it is a core overlap, then you can remove it by coarse sanding for overlaying of the laminate. If the customer is still not satisfied with the result, what we do is make a random check of around 10 to 20 pieces and compare the same with that of any competitors. If the claim is found reasonable, the complaint is settled. However, if the problem persists, we should inform the factory. Any overlapping problem is of semi-critical importance.
Great. So that should do the trick. Next we look at warping.
Warping is the bending of plywood, blockboards or flush doors. The bend can be diagonal, lengthwise or along the width.
What can possibly cause bending?
A product can warp if it is exposed to excess heat, depriving it of optimum moisture. This usually happens during peak summers. Also, non-ventilated storage conditions and improper stacking can also lead to warping.
How can we tell if a ply has a warping problem?
To inspect warping, we must check the extent of warping. Place the panel on a horizontal plane and measure the extent of warp or bend across the diagonals or sides. We have to also check the storage of the panels to identify whether the panels are getting proper ventilation or not, because improper ventilation may lead to a temperature variance which can cause bending. Finally, we have to check the balance of the application of the material in question.
I guess we have covered all possible ways to detect warping. I'm sure there's no way any warped ply can escape undetected with that process. But how do we deal with a warp complaint?
If the warping diagonally is within 10 to 12 mm, then it is acceptable, provided there are no special considerations by the user. If it is beyond that limit and the complaint is not settled amicably, the uncut material should be replaced, and so-called replaced material should be taken into the go-down and kept under pressure in a manner such that the warped sides face each other in order to minimize warping in the course of time. In case there has been a mistake in the application, it is our task to educate the user about proper stacking and avoiding unbalanced application of the material. Ask the user to store the material in a cool and dry place, away from direct sunlight and direct exposure to moisture. And for prolonged storing, ask the user to keep it wrapped in polythene or tarpaulin to avoid moisture loss or gain. It is important to make sure that the material is stacked on a level ground, preferably on pallets.
Well, the customer can never be too careful when it comes to handling and storing plywood. As they say, prevention is better than cure. But there are some things that cannot be prevented. Isn't that so, Ajit?
Well, we have tried to defy that notion as much as we can. But sometimes problems such as borer infestations happen even after taking the most meticulous care. Borers are the larval form of different families of beetles that live inside wood and eat it up. A borer problem is a naturally caused one. It only happens when the wood used for making plywood, block boards or flush doors originally contained borer.
How do we inspect a borer problem then?
Considering the intense treatment that every product undergoes, it is next to impossible for borer to exist. And even if the wood did contain borer, it would all die by the time the finished product is manufactured. But nonetheless, to inspect whether there is a borer problem, we start by checking for pinholes or powder falling from pores. This can be done by slightly tapping the product and examining if powder falls down from it. It's essential that we check the material thoroughly, as there is a possibility of the borer not coming out of the plywood, even if it is a genuine problem. If the product is affected, then we have to carry out pest control on the affected area, if the damage is not too severe. If it is, then we dismantle the product and replace the affected parts with new fabrication and carry out pest control on it, so that no further borer attacks can happen. A borer problem falls under the critical category. However, it's worth noting that Century Ply has not had any borer complaints.
Speaking of borer, it reminds me that termites can also be quite a pain.
Quite true. Similar to borer, a termite problem is when the plywood, blockboard or flush door are infested with termites. However, termites attack the wood from outside, eating it and leaving a trail of mud and rubbish. Termite problems are caused if either the wood is subjected to excess moisture for a considerable time or if the product is applied in a place that is already affected by termites. Century Ply products are termite proof. However, if a complaint does come, we need to check the genuineness of the problem. Generally, we can identify a termite attack by checking for wet surfaces or areas in the vicinity of where the material is being used or stored. If a product happens to be affected by termites, we have to carry out a thorough pest control on the affected parts, if the damage is not too severe. If it is damaged severely, then it is dismantled and replaced with a new fabrication, after which pest control is carried out to ensure no further damage happens. A termite problem falls under the critical category.
Moving on to delamination. Ajit, tell us what exactly this problem pertains to.
Delamination refers to the splitting or separation of veneer layers, or the face veneer of a plywood, blockboard or flush door. Delamination is caused due to bonding failure during production or due to mishandling or wrong application at the customer's end. For example, hammering nails at the corners or at the edges due to wrong fabrication can cause delamination. Delamination can be on the surface or in the core layers, so we first need to identify where the delamination is occurring. Surface delamination is usually caused by bubbles that are created underneath the face veneer. Secondly, we check if the delamination is repairable or not. If the delamination is on the surface, we can try to get it repaired with the customer's consent. Since it is on the face veneer and easily accessible, the repairman can easily try and fix the delamination. However, care must be taken so that the repairing matches with the existing face veneer. If it is not repairable, the material needs to be replaced. Delamination is regarded as a critical category problem.
What is the defect with this one?
This ply has a face crack problem. You can see visible cracks like these appearing on the face of some plywood, block boards or flush doors. These cracks are generally a result of the use of inferior quality of face or high moisture content in the face veneer or glue line during the manufacturing process. We ideally inspect it by checking whether it is repairable and make sure that it is not a major problem as far as the application is concerned. And finally, see whether there is delamination occurring where the cracks appeared.
Is there any chance of fixing face cracks on the spot?
For minor cracks with a size of 1 to 2 mm, the carpenter himself can attempt to repair it with a matching color filling, followed by sandpaper finishing. However, if that doesn't do it and the problem persists, we can ask the user to accept a grading discount. Otherwise, we have to replace the material if they have further objections. A face crack problem is classified as a semi-critical problem.
Alright, we move on to the next defect. You call it chipping, right?
Yes, chipping is also a kind of delamination of the face veneer. It is when the edges of a plywood, blockboard or flush door start to tear out. This usually happens either when the product is cut using a blunt saw, which tears off the veneer, or if it is not bonded well. It can also be caused due to improper application. So, when inspecting the problem, we need to first identify if the chipping happened due to a cutting fault, such as from the use of a blunt saw. Using a saw that has less than 12 teeth per inch, or using a saw with an unequal bend along the edges can cause chipping. Samples should be sent to the factory for a boiling test to confirm whether it is a manufacturing fault or a cutting fault.
And how do we deal with these two scenarios?
If it is found that chipping is due to the use of a blunt saw, the complaint is not to be accepted. And in the case of a manufacturing or bonding problem, we get the carpenter to rub abrasive paper on the chipped areas and try to settle the complaint either by offering the product to the consumer at a discounted price or compensating with a replacement. Chipping is categorized as a semi-critical problem.
Great. We're down to the last few defects. Next on the list are core gaps. What are core gaps, Ajit?
A core gap refers to either a gap between two plies or the gap in a single ply. Core gaps are caused because of non-alignment of core veneers during manufacturing. Gaps that are as small as the diameter of a needle are referred to as pinhole gaps. As per the Bureau of Indian Standards, two gaps of up to 1 to 2 mm width and 100 mm length in each layer are permissible in prime grade plywood. In second grade plywood, 3 gaps of up to 4 mm width and 150 mm length in each layer are permissible. To inspect these holes, we check if there is any problem in the application of the plywood. Also make sure that the core gap is not filled with putty.
And how do we settle core gap complaints?
If the gaps are found to be within the limits, then we do not settle the complaint. Instead, we educate the customer that those gaps will not result in weak furniture. And for those holes that are caused due to the application of the plywood, we need to check the application and advise the user to switch to a more suitable application to overcome the gap. That way, settling the complaint mutually. If the customer is reluctant, then we can propose a discount, or the material can be replaced with fresh supplies. In case repairing is required, a local carpenter should easily be able to fix the problem. Core gaps as a problem are of semi-critical importance.
Well, all this has been extremely educative. The next complaint, as I see, is batten gaps. What are these, Ajit?
A batten gap is a gap within the batten used inside a blockboard. It is usually caused by non-alignment of core battens that are used to manufacture the blockboard. As per the Bureau of Indian Standards, 2 gaps of up to 1 to 2 mm width and 100 mm length in each layer are permissible in prime grade blockboards. In second grade blockboards, 3 gaps of up to 4 mm width and 150 mm length in each layer are permissible.
How do we settle a batten gap complaint?
We must first understand the extent of the gaps, and their effects on the furniture manufactured are to be studied. The customer can then be educated and brought into confidence that these gaps will not result into weak furniture. If the customer is reluctant, a discount can be forwarded, or the material can be replaced with fresh material in case the same is uncut. batten gaps are regarded as a semi-critical problem.
Now here's a ply with a poor finish. Ajit, what causes a poor finish?
When chemicals, oil, water or repair marks are visible on the surface of the ply, we call it poor or improper finish. These are usually caused during manufacturing or during storage or transit. In most cases, it takes a simple effort of rubbing the surface of the ply with a piece of sandpaper or removing the dust and seeing if the surface looks good. However, even after dusting it off, if the surface still has visible patches, it is probably due to a bleed-through of resin. The same may also have been caused if the plywood was stacked for a long time, causing oil to ooze out onto the surface.
So, when we come across a ply with an improper finish that cannot be merely dusted off, what are we supposed to do?
In that case, the finishing of the plywood can be done by a local carpenter. Obviously, if the quantity of plywood is high, once again the factory can send over a few persons to handle the rework required. In case of IS 710, the marking side of the face of the ply should be free from any patches. However, on the back, patches at distance of not less than 600 mm apart are permissible. The maximum dimension of any one patch shall not be more than 40 mm. In case if IS 303, 4 patches per square meter are allowed provided they are light and do not mar the appearance. So, if this percentage is exceeded, we need to settle the complaint mutually with the customer, either by proposing a grading discount or by replacing the products with fresh replies if the customer has further objections.
And here we come to our last complaint, improper marking.
This refers to when the marking on plywood, blockboards or flush doors is different from what the actual product is. Incorrect thickness and size marking is also considered improper marking. This is not a complaint as much as it is a concern by a dealer when the necessary and legal markings and labels are either not applied on the plywood or applied incorrectly. This is usually the result of human error at the final stage of production, when a product goes unchecked at the quality check clearance. This problem has nothing to do with the quality of the product, rather with the billing and invoicing. When we come across an improper marking related complaint, we are to measure the strip width of the ISI mark, the distance from both sides of the box containing the ISI mark, the CML number, and other details. The same are to be corrected by the branch salesperson, and this information is to be given to the supplying plant. In case of a difference in billing, the necessary amendments are to be done at both ends. Improper marking is regarded as a critical level problem.
Well, that brings us to the end of discussing defects and how they are to be handled. Now we come to the next part. After receiving a complaint, how do we go ahead and address it through our complaint handling process? Ajit, will you please tell us more about the complaint handling process?
It is a process established to rectify a situation where a customer comes across with the said issue. It is more to do with our internal departments and how the complaint is handled from within.
Well, let us look closely at how the process flows.
It starts with the customer making a complaint about a product or material they purchase from one of our dealers or directly from our factory. This complaint is received by our sales executives or sales officers who visit the customer or the dealer, take photographs of the defective products and fill in the complaint form. The complaint is then logged into SAP by BAT. After the sales personnel send them the fill complaint form, an email is sent to the concerned person at the branch, factory or HO. Branch personnel then take the appropriate actions to resolve the complaint, taking help of the factory if required. The first question that needs answering is whether the material in question has been used or is unused. If the material is unused, SE, ASM or the BSM have the authority to replace the material from the complaint side with fresh material from the godown or the branch. On return of the material from the site, the godown in charge has to segregate it based on its observation. If the material seems acceptable, it is put back into fresh, saleable stock, and the complaint is closed. If not acceptable, however, it is to be locked up in the damaged location. And the aging of that stock will begin on the date the stock is returned to our godown. Concerned executive at HO in charge of complaints, however, has the authority to remove the stock lock caused by the return of material aging more than 6 months. The factory personnel then visit the branch based on the stock accumulations at the damaged location. For all the defective material such as material with core gaps, warpage, delamination, etc., the BSMs and the factory jointly decide a liquidation option, either to sell the material at a discount or return the material to factory. In either case, the complaint is settled. But if a liquidation option is not chosen and the issue still remains undecided, it is taken up by the PMG or LOB head, who then decides a solution to close the complaint. Now let's come to the second possibility, where the material in question has been cut or used. If the case is so, then the complaint handling process will be decided based on the estimated value of the compensation. To simply put it, if the compensation required is estimated to be less than Rs 10,000, then the BSM has the authority to finalize the value and create a credit note to settle the complaint. However, specific to delamination and chipping complaints, the samples need to be sent to concerned executive at HO in charge of complaints for factory analysis. If the value is estimated to be more than Rs 10,000, then the following two cases arrive. More than 10,000 or less than 50,000 value. Branch personnel sends pictures along with description of complaint. In case the complaint ID is found to be genuine, factory suggests a compensation value. If the value is accepted by the BSM, a credit note is given to the customer and the complaint is settled. But if the suggested compensation value is not accepted by the BSM, then the issue is passed forward to the NSM, who then takes the final call and settles the complaint once and for all. Value more than 50,000. The same process as earlier is followed. However, a factory personnel visit is required to take a conclusive decision on the case. However, if the factory rejects the complaint or in case the compensation value is not accepted by the BSM, the same is escalated to LOB head to close this once and for all.
Well, there you have it, the detailed process of handling a customer complaint. We are sure this has given you a fair idea of how a complaint situation is to be rectified. Hopefully, with practice and a few actual experiences, you'll be able to easily handle customer complaints in the future. Thanks, Ajit, for taking the pain to explain the various complaints and the process used to address them. I'm sure all our employees will benefit immensely from this and will be well informed when it comes to handling customer complaints.
My pleasure.